and we're a good resource for that. And hang on, and I'm going to go to the next slide here. I want everybody to know that we have done a series of presentations, how to use a FLIR camera, how to retrofitting your home, the envelope window, solar heat pumps. We did a special on retrofitting a modern home. We talked to builders and got their perspective. We talked about incentives. We've talked about demand response, and a lot more. And we have our last presentation coming up on June 12th, 7 p.m. That's next week, talking about embodied carbon. And if you don't know what that is, come and listen, because it's going to be a good presentation by Tim Locke with Opal Architects. And probably the most important thing is that you know where to get to these presentations. They're all recorded, and you can find them at lincolngreenenergy.org. So this evening's presentation is being put on by Vicky Diadiuk. Is that right, Vicky? Yeah. And Charles Sizer. And let me give you just a quick intro to these people. Chuck is a food process engineer, and he dedicated his career to fluid food product development. And that's things like beverages and puddings and soups and anything that's fluid. He worked on product development, processing, and packaging, and he culminated his career as director of the National Center for Food Safety and Technology before he became an active consultant in the industry. And today we're interested in what the carbon footprint is of our foods, and he's become pretty passionate about that. Vicky is an MIT lifer. After getting all her degrees in physics there, she worked at Lincoln Lab and on campus, where until 2023, she was the Associate Director of Operations at the Microsystems Technology Labs. And as she told me, she said, none of this has anything to do with today's talk, but as a matter of fact, it really does. Vicky is a great scientist, and she's taken intense interest in climate change and what we can personally do to make a difference. And Vicky has really incorporated it into her life, and she's here to share that with us today. So with that, I'm going to move this presentation to Chuck and Vicky, and if you'll give me just a second, because I'm not an IT person, I'm going to cancel out of one presentation and join the next one. Okay, let's see. And okay, Vicky, where is share screen on here?
At the bottom. Or top. At the bottom.
Yeah. Okay, there we go. Okay. And I think, right. No. Yeah, let's go back and share again and pick the right presentation.
It's coming up in everybody else's but yours.
Is it?
Yeah. But we need to see it. We need to see it.
Okay. Yeah, we're gonna do this. Okay,
Yeah, there we go.
now
Now we're cooking.
Okay.
Wow.
All right.
Presentation.
All right.
Get into presentation mode, I guess. Well, okay, everybody's seeing all our slides on the side. There we go. That's better. All right. Hello, folks. Sorry about the, oops. Yeah. And I don't know if you can see me or not, but yeah. Okay, good. Thanks for coming. Hopefully this will be interesting. And if you hang around till the very end, Chuck will demonstrate why some of the foods that we buy are more carbon intensive than others. But we're going to start super simple. By giving you an outline, the basically introductions and the background on food and climate change. And food will I mean, why do we eat? I mean, it's kind of obvious, but we'll see that these choices matter. What contribution does food do for global warming? And it's a lot. The carbon footprint of the foods we eat, you'll see that it very much matters what your choices of food are. And then Chuck will give us gory details of the contribution of the food manufacturing to carbon emissions. And then how we can we reduce our own? And we'll taste some carbon-friendly foods at the very end for those who made it all the way to the town hall. For use at home, you'll have to taste your own carbon-free foods. So the next slide is Chuck's.
This shows the global climate change that's going on. This is the temperatures that have occurred over the past, what's it, 1880 until now, to 2024. This shows 2018. We had a little bit of drop during COVID, but since that time, the climate warming has just increased dramatically. And in fact, they're expecting that within 18 months, we're going to hit the upper limit that we thought we'd hit in 2050.
Right.
So it is very, very serious that we do something to change what we're doing.
Right. This is a scary map, very scary map. Again, only going to 2018, it's only gotten worse from there. And as you can see, the quote unquote developed countries are the ones that contribute the very most to these temperature changes, but also because they're also producing the most carbon emissions. None of this is super new. I'm sure you've heard this over and over. So the question is, are we going to wait till 2050 where we're all sort of essentially dying of heat, or can we do something before? And there's all sorts of high-tech approaches and low-tech approaches. And today we'll talk about the low-tech. But the UN chief, Gutierrez, basically said that if we don't do something, we're really going to be in deep doo-doo. So time to do something.
Yep. And he just today came out with this quotation, and you can find it in the New York Times. But we are already at the 1.5 centigrade goal, but basically 18 months away from it. And we're going to reach some point where it's going to really have an effect. So we're going to see the ice melting, the seas rising. It's going to hit the economies. We're going to have worse storms. We're going to have more drought. And at the same time, we're going to have more rain. The rain that we have is going to be increasingly intense. So we'll see a lot more flooding, like what they're seeing in Germany and Switzerland right now. And it's just exacerbating. And it's very frustrating because there's very little that we can do to interfere with it. There is so much money being made by the gas and oil industry that we cannot take the actions that are necessary.
Yeah. And at some point, they will realize that their own sort of income stream is going to die if people are dying and can't afford to buy anything because there's no food. So this will be self-correcting, but it'll be too late for everybody, including all the species besides humans in the world.
So this is an overview of the greenhouse gases, and carbon dioxide accounts for about 82% of that. Methane is a very large producer of global warming, and there are multiple sources of methane. Probably the biggest one right now is fracking, and we've seen in the last 6 years a significant jump in the amount of methane that is in the atmosphere. And there are also other areas. If you have a downed tree and there are termites eating it, that's a source of methane. Sewage is a source of methane. Cattle are a source of methane. So there's a lot of things that contribute to the methane. Although it's a small fraction, it is significant from a warming standpoint.
Yeah.
Also, we have nitrous oxide and fluorinated gases. One interesting thing about the fluorinated gases was that Susan Solomon identified the ozone hole in the late 1990s. And action was taken in order to reduce the fluorinated carbons that were used as refrigerants. And a result of that, within 20 years, that trend was reversed. So it gives us hope that there is time to reverse what's going on and make changes to our life. All
right, more scary things. You can see projections all the way to 2100 or so. If we do something, oops, if we do
Make sure
something,
you're close enough
Yeah.
to the microphone.
if we do something or if we don't. So that the 2 degrees and the 1.5 degrees are sort of wishful thinking at the rate we're going, but we need to keep trying because otherwise all these horrible predictions will come true. So no need to sort of go into the gory details, but this is way beyond where we are. I mean, we're at peak. So the hope is that we can follow these curves down to where it's a little bit more tractable. We'll see what we can do. And again, waiting for industry and government to react is fine, but I think we can try to do something on an individual basis that will be fairly effective. This is a slide, again, showing from cradle to grave, pretty much, of the various contributions to the carbon emissions of the various things that we do. So Chuck, do you want to go into the details?
Yeah. So that what they've done is they've tried to separate the different areas where carbon is emitted, and you have from the cradle to the gate or the manufacturer, and then you have from the cradle to the gate to the real retailer, and then you have from one end of the spectrum all the way to the grave, which is the putting it into landfill or burning the trash, and it consists of multiple phases. And what we'll try to do is we'll try to break this out so that you have a little bit better understanding of where the contributions are in the foods that you eat.
Okay. So how diet affects the carbon footprint of things. Again, this is a fairly self-explanatory slide. We don't need to go into the gory detail, but you can clearly see that meat eaters have a larger footprint than vegan folks, mostly because the meat part, the emissions of cattle and other animals are huge, and we'll go into more detail in the next few slides. Clearly, we're not suggesting that anybody starves, but the no beef diet, which is very easy to do, would help substantially, almost a factor of 2, in the carbon emission of our daily consumption. So without waiting for anybody to do anything, we could be doing something that matters. So animal husbandry, which is, if you eat meat, you're going to have to raise animals, and there's many problems with that. Environmental damage is huge. As we mentioned before, methane is a very important contributor, but in addition, it's a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So even though there's less emissions of methane, what it does to the atmosphere is way worse. It is the second most abundant of the anthropogenic gases. It accounts for 16% of the global emissions. It traps heat in the atmosphere much more efficiently than CO2. That's what we mean by it's more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Its concentration in the atmosphere has more than doubled over the last 200 years. And that's probably tracking population and development, in that when poor countries start eating like rich countries, the consumption of meat goes up gigantically. Because methane is a powerful greenhouse gas and short-lived compared to CO2, one could achieve significant reductions rapidly and significantly. So CO2 hangs around forever. Methane at least disappears quickly. So if we manage to control the methane emissions, we would be helping immediately a lot. So that's the hope. Continuing on with the cost of animal husbandry, in addition to everything I just said about gas emission, animal suffering is not to be neglected. I mean, the conditions in factory farms are horrid. The conditions in the slaughterhouses are even worse. And the fact of the matter is, you look at the numbers of animals killed so that people can have, a hamburger, it's just crazy. In addition, by eating all this animal products, human health suffers immediately. Obesity is obvious. Heart disease gets aggravated by eating red meat and animal protein. Type 2 diabetes and breast cancer increase, and there's some indications that COVID complications are worse when people eat a lot of meat. So both animals and humans suffer by eating meat, and therefore, there's all the reasons for which you should be vegetarian are shown here. For the planet, lower greenhouse gases. lower land use and much lower water use, which also is a sort of resource that is becoming more and more scarce. For yourself, it's less energy intensive preparation. It's really easy to clean up since you don't have fats, which are hard to get rid of. It lasts longer in the fridge. And if it happens to defrost, it won't kill you if it gets spoiled. And often the grocery bills can be lower. That depends on what you buy. But for the most part, meat is expensive and vegetables are less. So, all right. So can we change the footprint, our carbon footprint by what we eat? Obviously, reducing meat and dairy products would be great. If you picture the animals you're eating, while you're eating them, you kind of will lose your appetite really quickly. So think about what they went through to get to your plate. Would you really eat them if you had to kill them and then skin them and prepare them and all that, as opposed to just buying your little pink shrink wrap cube? Probably not. Those of you who are hunters might, and you guys continue to do that, fine, you kill it, you prepare it and you eat it. That's the way of nature. But that is not what happens in the agriculture and husbandry businesses. You can learn to cook with vegetables, and there are many, many good recipes. You can cook meals at home, in which case you take responsibility for the ingredients, eliminate a lot of food waste by saving and using the leftovers, and you can cook several meals at a time, reducing the carbon emissions of cooking. Obviously, for those of you who are gardeners, this is like great. It mitigates many of the emissions associated with the global food production, including transportation and so forth. And by planting green plants, you absorb and convert carbon dioxide, sequestering it and transforming it into oxygen, which is what we want. Shopping locally reduces the distance your food travels and therefore reduces your emissions. So all these little things, which seem like really trivial and kind of not that important, adding them up really becomes a major change in the amount of carbon that you yourself can emit. So what can you do to help? Garden, plant fruit trees, make your own wine or brew your own beer if you like that. And more important, this is Chuck's contribution. Recycle and reuse containers, of course, but more important, reuse. I mean, this idea that we'll recycle everything, before you recycle, try to reuse it. Microwave is and induction cooking is more efficient than heat. And canning and preserving foods is great. So maybe someday we'll have a carbon footprint label on foods that are packaged, maybe not. In the meantime, you can sort of figure out what it is by whether it's meat or not. And now Chuck's going to tell us all about the why we eat, I guess.
So the big question is, how much do I eat and how much should I be eating? So the guy on the left is probably about 160 pounds. He's probably going to need about 2,200, 2,300 calories of food per day. The little guy is probably going to need somewhere around 1,000 or 900 calories. The dog is probably going to need somewhere around 700 calories per day. The wife is probably around 1,700, and the little girl is somewhere in that 1,000 or less range of calories. But the big surprise is that the car in the background consumes the most food, because the fuel that it burns is 10% ethanol, and it's derived entirely from corn. So that car goes through a bushel of corn a week. And that is the largest consumer of food. If we got rid of all of the industrial applications for food, there is more than enough food to feed the population.
Yeah, the funny part about that is that the move to ethanol was presumably environmentally sound, trying to get away from gasoline. But in fact, there's no free lunch in this business. I think that's the bottom line. So one has to be very careful about what one changes to, and not get bamboozled by something that sounds good that isn't.
Yeah. Well, the other aspect of that is not obvious is that 20 years ago or 30 years ago, we were using tetraethyl lead to reduce spark knock, and ethanol does the same thing. But now they're taking it and they're turning around and saying, well, it's regenerative and so forth, when in fact it's still polluting, and it's using a lot of carbon, not only to refine the corn, but also to grow it and fertilize it.
Right.
So it has a huge carbon footprint.
Okay.
So recently, the Lancet came out with a guide for what you should eat, and this is a pretty broad guide, and it suggests different categories and how many calories you should get for each one of these and how many grams. So they're suggesting that you should eat whole grains, which I agree with, about 200 grams a day, 232, and it delivers about 800 calories. Potatoes or cassava roots, 50 grams, and about 39 calories. Vegetables, 300 grams. And this is the one that I think is really interesting. Once you go on a vegetarian diet, you find that these vegetables are very, very interesting and very flavorful. And they're a really good replacement. Once you start into this diet, it's hard to go back to eating beef. It's
Right.
really
And
interesting.
one of the things that people worry about is where am I going to get the protein if I don't eat animals? But if you look at this chart, you can see there's protein sources all over the place. So don't worry about you're going to die if you don't eat animals, because you will not.
Yeah.
Chuck, could you do us a favor for people that don't know how much 100 grams of vegetables is? Could you give
Oh.
us some comparison so that people understand that?
Yeah, 100 grams is a little bit less than a quarter pound.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I apologize. Scientists are always metric, and if you have any questions you'd like to have clarified, we would be glad to do that.
Right.
And we'll try to also use Fahrenheit rather than centigrade.
Yeah, maybe.
So we are always asking what should we be growing in our garden, and I put this up here just because we don't recognize how much the climate is changing. And this was in the newspaper yesterday that there is actually a flamingo from Florida that is now in Massachusetts. So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah, this is off Cape Cod. So I went in and I put in some different plants that we may not think about growing, but in fact, we might want to consider it. We would love to have the chestnuts back in this area. And there's this hope that we can get chestnuts growing again. And they produce a huge crop of nuts, and it'd be a lot of calories for us, and it would be really, really great if we get them to come back. Another thing that is interesting is Georgia peaches. We have a wonderful climate now that we can grow peaches and a lot of fruits we haven't ever considered before. We could also consider growing pineapple.
So you're saying we should go for more and more emissions so that we can become Hawaii?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We were just recently in the Azores, which is 33 degrees north latitude, and they're growing pineapples there. So it's just a matter of years before we will be able to grow pineapples in this area.
Yeah. Hopefully we don't get there.
Hopefully we don't get there. And then this is another one that is really interesting. This is corn. This corn is 12 to 18 feet high, and it's an Aztec corn that comes from Middle America and South America. A couple of interesting things about it. One is that it produces a large crop of corn. And secondly, it's not an annual, it is perennial. So we only plant it once and it will come back year after year. And the reason that the corn is an annual now is that DeKalb and other companies make enough money that they can support their business. And that's why we have all the hybrids, et cetera. So agriculture is also involved in what we eat. And then the last one I have, this is the fig tree. And this fig tree is actually growing in Lincoln. And we anticipate that we're going to get a good crop of figs this year. So a lot of things that we haven't considered before are on the table. And gardening locally is the best way to reduce your carbon footprint. So let's start taking a look at the carbon footprint of some of the food processing food processes that are used in the United States. So you have the carbon footprint of the raw materials. That's basically the farmers. You have the energy used in mixing. You have the processes, baking, other types of thermal process, the shipping, and the packaging. So here are some charts for some different types of bakery goods that are used. So we have bread and rolls, which is 6.12 megajoules per kilogram. So it's basically the number of calories per pound that you have, and it gives you an idea of the level. So breads and rolls are fairly high. Biscuits are a little bit lower. Frozen cakes and pies are a little bit lower, but the lowest one of all of them is cakes. And if you look at that, the highest usage, or the second highest usage, is actually in the cleaning of the baking pan, the pan washing. So it gives you a justification for eating cupcakes because you don't have to wash, you don't have to wash the pan. But every food's got a carbon footprint, and it comes from various places, and you also have to consider the nutrient content and how much it satisfies your hunger.
I don't really understand the graph. What is a megajoule?
It's a unit of energy. It's like a calorie or a BTU.
So, I see. So what percent of a kilogram of that food? A kilogram of that food requires that number of megajoules.
Yeah, a kilogram is 2.2 pounds.
Yeah.
Right.
So it'd be basically 2 boxes of crackers. Box of crackers is usually a pound. So that gives you some of an idea. I do hate to start converting units because it gets complicated. So that just gives you an idea of the proportion. And but why is this not going down? There we go. So this is another one. This compares the carbon footprint of different food products and how much they require. So this is a British paper. So crisp is actually a potato chip, and it shows the amount of energy. You can see that there is a lot of energy that's used in electricity, and there's quite a bit of fuel. The second one is French fries, and French fries are what we normally call French fries, and then starch, processed fruit and vegetables, ketchup, etc. So you look at these processes, the ones that consume the most energy are the ones that evaporate the most moisture. So being able to reduce the moisture content of a food product is very energy intense, and you want to avoid that if possible.
So Chuck, if I'm cooking and I'm concentrating a sauce and reducing it where it goes for 15 to 20 minutes to get the consistency of the sauce, that's pretty high energy use. And I would maybe be better off to thicken it with some cornstarch and make the process shorter.
Yeah, good point.
Or keep it more fluid. Don't worry.
Let or let it be more fluid.
Right.
So industry is moving to reduce carbon footprint, but right now they're not incentivized enough. And it's up to the consumer, it's up to us to make them incentivized. So we need to know and understand a little bit more about the carbon footprint of the different processes that are used. And we need to put pressure on these companies to have sustainable power, to have lower carbon footprint processes, and not be processing and shipping water. Processing and shipping water is the most lucrative business that there is in the food industry. So, there's a really interesting article in the New York Times yesterday, specifically about plastics in the food supply. And the number one largest source of plastics is bottled water. So reduce packaging waste, reduce the other waste. A lot of foods that you eat, only a small fraction of it is actually the product that you consume. Most of the product goes to the waste recycling. And it's interesting how industries have changed. if you look at cranberries in Massachusetts, originally it was the cranberry juice that made the most money. Then they discovered how to make craisins, and now the cranberry juice is the byproduct, and they make the most money from the craisins.
But there's less waste on the craisins.
Yeah, yeah, and it reduced the waste
Right.
stream significantly. So you see that happen in a lot of industries where what was once the product becomes the waste stream, and what was once the waste stream becomes the product.
Right. And speaking of waste, I think one of the other waste streams that at the moment I think is starting to be corrected is the fruits and vegetables that aren't so pretty that people used to not buy. I think people are now buying them, and in fact they're being sold as kind of ugly vegetables, and people kind of want to buy them because there's nothing wrong with them. They just don't look like super perfect. As well as restaurants, instead of throwing away what didn't get used, either giving it to shelters or making it available to people who otherwise would not be able to afford food. So not wasting food, I think, is a critical component of the reduction of carbon emissions.
Yeah, they say that anywhere from 10 to 30% of the food supply is waste.
Wasted.
And I think that's an understatement.
I agree.
So this is a really good example. This is a cup for coffee, and when you're done drinking the coffee, you eat it. It's an edible piece of packaging. And I think this is really a great example of what we can do to improve what we're doing.
Right.
Including a label?
It's optional.
It's coverage.
We often think that the effect on the environment is only from the CO2 and the methane emitted, but there are also other areas. And if we break that down into different food groups, you can see that we have greenhouse gases, we have the land use, we have the energy use, have acidification potential, and then we also have the potential for it emitting phosphates, which cause the greening, the algae blooms in the lakes that we have around here. And this categorizes it into the meat on the top, down to the legumes, et cetera, on the bottom. And you can see overall that generally the meat products and byproducts are at the top of the list as the biggest pollutants
In any
and-
way, yeah.
and waste and so forth. So it's another reason why we need to take and focus more on doing more vegetarian or vegan eating. I'm going to introduce you to some new processes that are out there that are much less energy intensive. This is a product that is preserved with high pressure processing, and it's a fresh pressed mango juice, and this one is under the Naked brand. And what does high pressure processing do? Well, you take this juice and you subject it to about 87,500 pounds of pressure. And so that's equivalent to 6 times ultimate depth in the ocean. And when it goes to that level of pressure, a couple of things happen. One is you get compression heating of it, and the temperature will jump quite a bit. But secondly is that it changes the chemistry of inactivation of microorganisms. And you can pasteurize something and you have no effect whatsoever on the flavor of it. And the color is preserved. It is a fantastic preservation technology. This is a high pressure unit that I had about 20 years ago. It's an Avure process. It's a 35-liter process, and we did research on it in activating pathogens. We found that it is very effective in activating common pathogens like Salmonella and Listeria, et cetera. So you can take a food like guacamole that normally when you cut it up, it starts to immediately brown, starts to degrade and so forth. High pressure process it, and it's good for 90 days without a problem.
How does the energy use of high pressure compare to heating it and processing it?
It's about 30% of what you would use for a hot fill process that is like normally used for juices. So it's quite energy effective, but at the same time, if you look at the embodied carbon, that steel that is in that cylinder that's in the center is about 6 inches thick. It takes a lot of energy to make it. And it is wrapped with piano wire that harness around it to keep the ends from blowing out. So it's very complicated, very energy intensive to make. But once you have it and you make it, the throughput is a little bit low, but carbon footprint is actually pretty good.
What's the
You're-
life of the equipment?
You're saving on the plants too. I mean, if you're processing avocados, they keep a lot long, 90 days.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Right.
It's very, very efficient.
And the furnace is not that carbon embodied free either. I mean, if you have a regular
Oh, that's
furnace,
right, that's right.
that also takes a lot of carbon to make the furnace and keep it running and so forth.
Yeah, it
So,
does.
so it
does.
sounds like a wash on the equipment and a
Yeah.
big saving on the preservation of the
A big
food.
savings and a reduction of waste.
Right.
You're not chipping the center of the avocado.
Right.
You're not chipping the skin. So you have like 50% reduction in freight.
Right.
You have much better shelf life. You have very good nutritional quality,
Right.
et cetera. So this is a very promising technique.
Right.
Now, the interesting thing about it is that when you have all that energy under pressure, wouldn't it be nice if you could capture it again and reuse it to pressurize another vessel? So that is where this is trending.
Hmm.
It's trending to be actually up to 100% reusable energy.
Cool.
Yeah, it's very fun technology. So another one that I think is very interesting is a chip fryer, potato chips. And my background is a little bit in the chip area. So I thought I would introduce you to how chips are made. So this is a normal chip fryer, and you have the yellow part, which is a bath of hot oil, and the oil is about 200 and or probably about 360 degrees Fahrenheit. And the chips are introduced, and they come to a boil at 212 degrees or 100 degrees centigrade. And that as they move through this conveyor, this circulating fat fryer, the temperature slowly comes up until it gets down to about 4 or 5%. And at that point, the temperature increases very rapidly, and it comes up all the way to the oil temperature, which is 360. And at that point, it turns brown and the flavor develops. So this is the way a fryer normally operates. These run at about 10,000 pounds an hour. And if you put in 10,000 pounds an hour of potatoes, you evaporate 8,000 pounds an hour of water.
Wow.
And that is energy intensive. So what we would like to do is come up with a way to do this better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to lower the hood so it's just below the oil. I'm going to introduce potatoes so that all the steam comes out and is 100% trapped underneath the hood. I'm going to take that and it's going to go up through a mechanical vapor recompression pump, and I'm going to heat this back up to 135 degrees and then use it to heat the incoming oil. And I can increase the efficiency by a factor of about 7 by doing that. So rather than having to evaporate 8,000 pounds, we're down to about 1,200 pounds of water. And you can take these processes and significantly improve the efficiency of the process. So this is just another example, and it also extends into the dairy industry. And I'll show you a little bit about that. The dairy uses quite a bit of energy, and of the dairy ingredients, milk powder is one of the worst. You try to increase the concentration of it a little bit by evaporating some of the water off, but then you have to put it in a spray dryer. And some of these spray dryers are 20 stories high. And the water that has to be evaporated is incredible. And if you can imagine trying to keep something clean, a building that's 20 stories high, it is a phenomenal task to do. Same with whey powder. Cheese is not as bad. You're just pressing the whey off. Casein, lactose, etc. Milk concentrates a little bit better. And you get down to butter and cream, and they're pretty energy efficient. So one of the things that I've looked at is taking a look at the existing carbon footprint for just single strength milk and looking at where the energy is being expended. And there's basically about 4 areas, or pardon, not 4, there's 7 areas. There's the feed rations. There's the methane that's generated by the cow. So the cow is eating this food. And as it goes into their stomachs, they have 4 stomachs, the food is fermented and the bacteria break it down so that the cow can digest it. And in the process of breaking it down, the bacteria emit methane. And the average cow puts out about 300 grams of methane a day. So that's the enteric methane. Then the animal also has got to go to the bathroom. It's going to produce a significant amount of manure. And you can take and manage this manure, or you can just take and spread it on the crops. The next thing is the farm use of it. And that's not, unfortunately, that's not showing up at the top. Next is the transport and distribution. The next one is the retail distribution of it. And then finally, you have your consumption and disposal of the product. So if we look at it this on a farm basis, they now have farm manure digesters. And what you do is you take the manure, you pump it into a digester, and the manure ferments and generates methane. And that methane is then used to power a diesel generator that makes electricity. And one farm can power enough electricity for about 600 houses. So it's a really good way to reduce the methane and also at the same time serve as an energy source. So the farmers are looking at all these options and trying to reduce the methane gas that's delivered and try to make their processes more and more efficient. There's another thing that farmers are doing, and that is that they're feeding asparagus to the beef cattle. And asparagus is a kelp that is taken out of the ocean. And when they feed it to the animals, it reduces their methane production from 300 grams a day down to 30 grams a day. And it's a pretty efficient process.
It still doesn't do well, to save all the other problems with eating the beef. It helps with the methane, but not everything else that I mentioned was bad with eating meat.
That's right. Yeah.
This is more about milk.
This
Right.
is more about milk.
Right.
Yeah.
True.
So this is the breakdown of the carbon footprint, and it defines it into the carbon dioxide and the nitrous oxide that's generated in the feed. For example, when you're growing corn, it will generate nitrous oxide. It's the enteric methane, which is entirely methane that's coming off 300 grams a day per animal. Then in manure management, farm energy, the transport, processing, distribution, retail, and consumption. And there are new technologies out there where these can be really significantly reduced. And you can basically be sequestering carbon dioxide by growing your corn and other things and really reducing carbon footprint. So there is hope. There is hope. One thing we need to do to drive consumer change is we need to have a very clear and honest communication with consumers. How much energy is being used in the food product that you purchase? And that is not clear at all. And if we had that information, we would not be buying the way we do. So it's an immense challenge. It's got to be done now. I mean, the time is running out. The carbon footprint of food can be reduced significantly by the examples I showed you, but a coordinated plan must include a verified carbon footprint for the consumer. And I just put up one that I put together. So this is, let's say, 8 kilos of CO2 per kilo of product or whatever. It's got to have some number from like 1 to 10. It's got to reflect what is being used in the agriculture segment, which is green, the manufacturing segment at the bottom, the distribution, which is the checkered part, the use and preparation, and then the packaging and disposal. So if we had that information, we would make changes in the way we purchase food and become environmentally more conscious. So with that, I think we are ready to take a look at some foods.
Right.
And
Any questions? Yeah, before we dive in, any questions from either people here or people in Zoom? not, we can start.
I didn't understand the slide that had the circles with the different pieces, different bands of
Right.
color around them. What was good and what was bad? Could you go back to that?
Yeah, so that's how much energy it takes
Yeah.
to make each one of these things.
Right.
But go ahead and we can go
But I
back.
think your question is, was one better than the other?
Yeah, were you need the baking slide?
This one,
This one.
yeah,
That's
Yeah.
just the amount of energy it
It-
takes to make each one of these products
to make.
in the factory.
So,
So
Cakes take
so
less.
you look at the number in the middle.
Yeah.
And the higher the number, the more energy it
Takes,
takes.
right.
And then the circle, the colors tell you.
where it goes,
What's using the energy, what.
right,
process.
right.
Right. And for most of these, the baking is using the most energy. And that's where we're removing most of the water. So most of these products start out at somewhere between, I would say 16 and 35% water. And then you, for a cookie or a cracker, you're gonna remove that down to 1%.
So a
And-
cake takes much less energy than bread and roll because
It's moist,
the
It's
moist,
moisture.
it keeps the moist,
but
the
the
moisture,
frozen ones use a lot because you have to freeze it.
Yeah,
right?
Yep.
Yeah, so it's really moisture management through baking that causes it to use more energy. If you want it dry, you have to bake it and it uses a lot of energy. So that would be the case for bread, not the case for cake, because the cake is moist.
right.
So Chuck, from a nutrition standpoint, I'm gonna look at this and I'm gonna say we need to invent a whole wheat cake with less sugar, because if I want to look at this from a nutrition standpoint, I wouldn't eat cake instead of whole wheat bread.
That would be a good idea.
But if you ate moist bread, you would be okay.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
He's telling me,
Soggy
he's
bread.
telling me to invent a whole wheat cake.
So does that make sense, Anne?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, good. Anything else? So bottom line is, don't eat meat, but if you eat meat, make sure you get it from these good farmers that are trying to reduce the methane emissions and reuse the methane that comes out from the cow into their farm.
One thing was very interesting. We were in the Azores about it was 2 weeks ago, and there are chickens running everywhere, and wild or free roaming chickens are very environmentally friendly. They don't eat any grain. They're out there chasing insects and eating weeds and so forth. They're probably the best source of green, so to speak, meat that there is.
If you can catch them.
If you can catch
All right. So if we have no more questions,
Can you tell us about the food you're about to serve so that the
Yeah.
people
Yeah,
at
yep,
home can hear
yep.
about it?
yeah, we'll get to the end. Oh, I
I'm
overshot.
surprised to see almonds on it because almonds require so much water.
I think the comparison will be between almonds and almond milk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
key, that Chuck's trying to make the point that this liquefaction that people seem to want is a very high energy process
And shipping water.
and shipping water, right?
We ship a lot of water.
Chuck's good. Do you need a hand?
Okay.
Okay. So Chuck is the demo person.
Thank you.
Yeah. So HPP guacamole, what's HPP? The high pressure. The
So-
high pressure one, like you showed with that fancy machine.
So here are two of the products that are high pressure.
Yep.
We have the naked juice, and this product will last a long time, and it
They
is,
have to be refrigerated, I mean, because I always find these in the refrigerated section.
yes, you do. Yes,
And
you do.
Because even though they last 90 days, they last 90 days in the fridge.
I'm under confidentiality.
Uh-huh.
I'm disclosing anything further.
Okay. All right.
But I think we should,
Refrigerated food though tends to use a lot of energy in both. shipping
yeah.
and storing, and then, of course, the refrigerated system in the grocery store is very intensive in terms of
Sure.
leakage.
The FDA has approved 3 processes for low acid canned foods that are non-refrigerated. So if you do it for low acid canned food, you can do it for a fruit beverage. It's easy. So, yeah, this can be done shelf stable.
It's
Very-
coming.
very-
It's not available yet. Shelf stable, meaning that it doesn't need refrigeration, but it's coming.
Tastes
Yep.
better for refrigerated, but
Yeah, it does taste better. It
but
does.
you can go home and refrigerate it.
Yeah, that's right. And then this other one is a guacamole. And this is most likely made in Mexico.
Yeah, that's what it says. So the transportation is not great. The transportation energy consumption, but
It's all across the-
right,
And the nice thing is the amount that you're shipping is reduced.
Right.
And your spoilage is virtually zero.
right. The other good thing about this is the packages is fairly minimal, because some of these other packages, they have a wrapping and a container and a thing inside. And by the time you finish, you have a pound of trash.
Yeah. So these are examples of high pressure processing. And then here's another example. This is an almond milk. And I thought we would take and compare the nutritional labels of that to just regular almonds. And almonds have somewhat of a bad reputation that they may or may not deserve, probably deserve.
They use a lot of water.
They use a lot of water.
Well, they're grown in places that don't have enough water.
So that's right. So this is what, 4 gallons of water? Yeah. And if I had to ask you what contains more protein, a cup of this or 2 of these, what would you think?
More protein, I would say. Couple of this.
2 of these.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So this is shipping a lot of water,
Mhm.
and this is very energy intensive to make it.
Yeah, even though here it says that they're using 33% less water than they would otherwise, but that's still a lot of water.
It's a lot of water.
Yeah.
So if you want to make this at home, you can make it at home and not chuck the water and have no less packaging. So you look at a package like this will make gallons and gallons and gallons of almond milk.
How many almonds are in this package of almond milk?
9.
9
Nine
almonds.
almonds are in
Nine.
this package.
Wow.
Oh, my gosh.
Wow.
I mean, the equivalent, that's the equivalent.
So you're gonna give us a
150.
recipe of how to make almond milk?
Chuck's gonna tell you to eat almonds. and
He says,
not
eat the almonds and drink the water by itself.
So that's one example. I think any of these milk substitutes that you're looking at, they are energy intensive. They don't deliver the nutrient content the milk does. And they're very expensive. You know, it's basically $2 for a quart when you can buy a gallon of milk for $2.50.
Right, but that's just the product. What about the rest of the damage?
Yeah.
So I think that's where it gets tricky.
Yeah,
The,
it does.
the cradle to grave computation of
Yeah.
energy has to be sort of fair, and it's really hard to
Yeah.
do.
It is.
Cows take an awful lot of water too.
Exactly,
I mean, the almond trees take lots of water.
What they do.
Cows take a lot of
right,
water.
Yeah.
right.
And you've gotta
And-
collect the manure and,
Right.
you know,
Yeah,
it's a sanitation problem.
Yeah, and the feed for the cows
And the
takes
feed
a
for the
lot
cows
of
is
water.
dripping, so it's grown someplace with irrigation.
Right.
Yeah.
And
That's why we need to have something on the front of the label
that would be cool.
that is, done by a government organization
But
that's
fair.
accredited or some
Right.
accredited
Yeah,
organization.
I was gonna say, the cradle to grave computations are really hard to do.
Oh, they are.
So,
They
So,
are.
do you know the difference just in general between almond milk and cow milk?
cradle to grave,
Not cradle to grave, but I could come up with it.
But I think you also need to factor into that the completeness of the protein. And what other reason, I mean, the farmers are working so hard to make dairy farming more efficient. And it isn't efficient. I mean, we lived in Wisconsin for a while and there's great problems, but it's very hard to match the perfection of milk protein in anything else that we eat. I mean, there is nothing, if you think about the fact that babies drink milk and in a year's time, they grow 5 times their birth weight, right? We can't do that with any other kind of protein. It's
soy come
Yeah,
close?
yeah, I was gonna say.
It's
soy is
still-
good,
has all
but
their
it's
amino acids.
it's not, no, not like,
Everything.
not like milk. And
Yeah.
milk is very, very specifically targets the growth of your muscle, right? I mean, it's just such a perfect protein. I'm not a big milk drinker, but I look at the value of milk and I think if there's one thing that we should make more carbon efficient, it should be dairy, because for children and for people that are malnourished, there just isn't anything that's much better than milk. So anyway, I think if you are going to compare milks, you also need to look at the quality of the protein.
I think the other thing is when you look at the beverages that are made from seeds and oats and so forth, there also is a very significant waste stream because they're trying to extract the soluble parts of it. And for every pound that comes in, half of that goes to waste.
Probably an example and an exception to that would be soy, where the okara that comes off the soy is now being used as a byproduct.
I think they're trying to make it efficient and
Yeah,
use
they
the waste stream for something else. So
Yeah,
anyway,
sure.
I think the bottom line is it's not easy,
Not easy.
but it's important to at least consider it.
Oh.
I thought you said not eating.
Well, not eating would definitely help it.
Yeah.
That not eating would help a lot of problems.
Yeah.
We're not suggesting that yet.
So here's another example, and this is a diet cola. And this is an example of the worst product that you can find.
Liquid, no nutrients.
There's no nutrition in it. It does give us a lot of satiety. And in the form of pain, people love to have that carbonation, the bite on their tongue. And then it followed by the sweetness and the vanilla flavor.
And the dentists love it.
And the dentist makes a fortune on it.
This is sugar-free though.
This is sugar-free, yeah, and
It's very
caffeine
healthy
free.
then. Yes.
So we
Super
could
healthy.
have some tonight.
I think Chuck used this opportunity to go buy junk food.
Money on
I
that.
know, I know. So I also brought along some chips, some burritos and some cattle cook. These are examples of foods where there is a future if people can come up with improved processes. This is actually a very good way of maintaining the nutrient quality of potato chips or potatoes. Potatoes are a very good source of vitamin C, and about 80% of the vitamin C is retained in the chipping process. So it's a very good way to distribute it. And the fats that are used are very nutritious. They're unsaturated fats and they're quite good for you.
Okay, now we have a great excuse to eat.
Now we
potato
don't have to
chips.
feel guilty. So that basically wraps it up.
Well, I think, thank you very much, and hopefully this was useful information and you'll follow through and we'll reduce carbon footprints as much as we can and reduce packaging and everything else. So thanks again.
I want to thank Chuck and Vicky for putting together this presentation and for those that attended this evening. And remember that everything is recorded, and go to our website and check out past presentations on other topics. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay.